Servants Season 3, Episode 6 was titled Fish. Sean's dinner party goes south when Leanne is rude to a guest. Dorothy uncovers frightening details from the block party. What is going on to all my Servant fans out there, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again, breaking down the latest episode of Apple TV Plus, Servant Season 3. We're talking Episode 6 titled Fish, an episode in which we see Leanne is definitely embracing that dark side, and she has completely lost her faith. We learn a little bit about Nancy and her dark past, and Dorothy, she's starting to remember what happened to Jericho. We're breaking it all down here in this spoiler review, but before we do so, make sure you're checking me out on all my other social media accounts. If you all are new to the channel, we have officially crossed 20,000 subscribers, so I want to thank you all for being part of this community. And if you're watching this video for the first time and you want to be a part of this community, make sure you're subscribing and hitting that notification bell. And as you can see on the screen now, if you enjoyed this spoiler review, well, make sure to give it a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel, but also share this video to all the Servant fans you know out there. But more importantly, as you do every single week, go ahead and drop your comments in the comments below. Your pros and cons about this episode, favorite moment, least favorite moment, what Easter eggs did you all pick out from this episode, what were some deeper meanings that you all picked out, and of course, based on this episode and Leanne and her faith and everything that we got, what do you all hope to see in the future of this season in next week's episode? Let's talk about it in the comments below. So just my brief, quick review before we break it all down and really dive deep into this episode. I am really enjoying this character study that we're getting with Leanne. Again, if you all can recall where Leanne was from episode 1, season 1, and the progression of the character from the season 2 into where she's at now, the performance is just really outstanding to me. And of course, I know it has its flaws. We talk about it every week in the comments as far as this approach to unraveling things and how it's kind of a slow, well, not kind of, it is definitely the definition of a slow burn. But I personally have really enjoyed this season and really kind of exploring who Leanne is and seeing the switch. We've always known she's had that darker side. And it wasn't until really last year that we saw her literally killing someone on screen with Josephina. But now seeing all of these events shake out, from the beehives, from the seagulls, to the finger a couple weeks ago, and to this point where she's looking right at Nancy and tells her about herself. I mean, it is just seeing this switch up and seeing this kind of more of her embracing that darker side and her leaving her religion and maybe building something different has been something to really enjoy. There are some flaws that I do have with this episode that we'll talk about, but overall, from a character perspective and narrative for Leanne, I really enjoyed it. But again, we're going to break it down, but let me know your thoughts on Leanne and your pros and cons about this episode in the comment section. So let's break it all down as we open the episode with seeing Sean praying. And after tonight's dinner date, there's going to be some more praying for Sean because things did not play out as he was hoping it would be. And we're going to talk about Sean in this episode a lot. But let's focus on Leanne, who is having a nightmare about the attack on that night. And it's Dorothy that's waking her up. And we see Dorothy continue to say, "I'm so proud of you, Leanne. You're making progress. You're opening yourself up more." But we all know Leanne has switched, and again, we're going to talk about it. I don't know if it was that mark, which we still don't really have a full understanding of what that marking was from the person, and a lot of you all said it wasn't the guy that we end up know that dies in this episode, or say last week. Who exactly was that hand, and what did that mark do to Leanne? Was it maybe, just coming to think about it, was it maybe one of the homeless kids that was like has her under this trance and kind of opens herself up? We still have some questions about that. But again, these nightmares, we finally find out what happened on that night of the attack, and we're going to break down that scene here in a bit. But we see Sean continues to shoot down the hosting gig that they keep calling him about to be the chef of this show. As we all know, he did that in season 1. And it's in this moment that we see that he doesn't want to do it. We know that last week. We know what happened when he went to this. But I will say, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, when he left to do it that, presumably last year in the show's timeline, he had to travel to Arizona, but they're saying that it's in Philly. So it's like, Sean, it's not like that bad to leave the home and do something on your own. But again, we understand his hesitancy because when he left his family last time, we know what happened with Dorothy. Obviously, we know what happened with Jericho. But again, Leanne's assuring him, everything's going to be fine now that I am in the house here. But again, it's like, it's local, Sean. You can maybe explore it a little bit. But cut to this next scene here. And you all know I like to kind of dive a little bit deeper. And sometimes I make a little bit of a stretch. But it's in this moment that we see that Dorothy has kind of embraced gardening, which we really don't know I doubt that the news people fired her for the incident that happened a couple weeks ago. Like, that's a lawsuit on their hand if they're firing her for what happened. But I do think that they probably gave her like a leave of absence, like, hey, work on yourself and we'll call you if we need you. But I wonder if she's ever going to go back to whether it's on camera or behind the scenes. But neither here nor there. She's embracing gardening and she's having this conversation with Leanne, and they're like having girl time, sharing secrets about Sean going back to or potentially him going to do this cooking gig, and also just the conversation about, just chattering, right, and having this secrets, which is a big thing about this episode. But what I took away from this moment, I put it in my notes here, we see Dorothy, and there's many examples of this, when she's starting to like have these triggering moments that reminds her of what happened to Jericho as she's putting her hands in the dirt, almost kind of like, and she says in this episode, rebirth. I wonder if her putting her hands in the dirt in this episode, and like I said, there's multiple moments where she's kind of recalling what happened last year, and we'll talk about those other examples, but this was one here, putting her hands in the dirt, bringing something to life in the form of, flowers and gardening, but going back to Jericho, me being a mom, me birthing Jericho. I wonder if this is one of those triggering moments that we get throughout the episode. Let me know what you all thought about that in that particular moment. Again, you all know I like to kind of dig and deep and all that different stuff. I might be stretching there, but let me know what you all thought about that moment. But back to Leanne, who tells Sean that he should take the job because, again, she's in the house. She's going to keep the family safe. But Sean's like, no, I'm not going to do the job. But it's really interesting, this moment. And also, even Leanne is noticing the difference in Sean as he is, we know he's getting back to his religious side, as he quotes to her a quote from the Bible. I believe it's in Proverbs. He says to her, pride comes before the fall, which in essence means people who are overconfident or too arrogant are likely to fall. Again, Leanne's like, that's not you, Sean. Who making you say this? And we all know, again, he's trying to find his inner peace and go back to his religious side. But it's also in this moment that it was kind of like a weird kind of block scene in regards to the coordination of the scene, where Leanne's walking up to Sean, which I don't know why she was walking up to him, as she's saying, oh, you don't have to build bridges. And he like falls into the pit. Now, I don't know. Again, I thought it was just kind of weird. And even Sean says, has Leanne been acting weird? And we all know why she's acting weird, because of what happened last week and her being attacked. But I was thinking about that scene a little bit more, and if you all, for my, the people that watch these reviews and really kind of enjoy my breakdowns, you all remember when I mentioned, I want to say it was episode 2 or maybe episode 1, when Sean bumps into Leanne and he spills like that goat blood on her stomach, and I was like, is she pregnant? Is this foreshadowing for Sean maybe stabbing her in the future? I wonder if this scene is foreshadowing a moment of Sean and his downfall and him looking up at Leanne. I don't know if there's correlations to that, if I'm just, again, digging and stretching. Let me know if you all took some deeper meaning in him falling in the pit, and if that means anything more than meets the eye. Let's talk about it in the comments section. But moving on, we go back to Dorothy, who's pushing Leanne again to go outside with her and Jericho. And we notice that Leanne's wearing her winter jacket in the middle. I believe it's spring or summer. It looks beautiful outside. Like, why are you wearing a winter jacket in this good weather? But again, it speaks to her PTSD. It speaks to her being afraid. As we cut back to that night, we get a quick moment here where we see Leanne's outside and she sees the homeless people. They're looking at her. And then we cut to the scene where we see the Lesser Saints members pin her against the tree, and they say to her, we know who you are and we know what you have done. And at this point in the episode, I'm like, okay, can we discover what happened that night? Can we find out what happened to those members, and if my prediction has come true, if the homeless people helped her? We're going to get to that here in a second now. But going into the homeless guy, who at this point goes into the Turner's backyard and asks Dorothy, is Leanne home? Can you see if she's home? He's like, no, get out of my backyard. And at that moment, I'm like, yo, Turner family, you got all this security cameras and had the people come through in the house. You telling me you can't lock your goddamn back gate? You got people walking in and out. Hey, I know they feel comfortable in the neighborhood, but seriously, you got to put a lock on that damn door. And we'll talk about there's someone that locks the door eventually. But I'm like, come on, seriously, they're just walking around their house. But neither here nor there. In comes Julian, who I said last week has been acting very weird. And he does something very weird in this next scene here as he's talking about the dinner he will be attending. Yet again, no Vera, and I'm hoping this show doesn't do Vera like they did. I can't think of the character's name, but the psychologist or the therapist who was helping the Turners and who was dating Julian for a little bit for the first 2 seasons, and she just like disappeared out of nowhere. I hope they don't do that with Vera, and they do that with a lot of characters in the show when they kind of pop up and then we don't see them again, or they give us some kind of weak excuse of why they're not in the show anymore. I hope they don't do that with Vera, because we all know, we've been talking about it for weeks. Does she have any doings with the Lesser Saints? Is she just a normal citizen, a normal person that just mind her business? Or I shouldn't say mind her business, because she was very much so in Dorothy's business. But I want more of Vera. I hope it's just not a throwaway character. Let me know your thoughts on that. But it's in this moment here that we cut to Dorothy finding out and digging deeper into the night of the attack as she sees the clothes in the laundry basket, but also she goes and looks at the footage and she sees that she was attacked. And I don't know if you all noticed from the timestamp from when she was running to the park to when she came back to that back gate, which again is unlocked all the time, we see that it's a 20-minute timestamp. So I'm thinking in my head, 20 minutes, that's a lot of time for being attacked. What happened to Leanne that night? Well, we're going to get into that here in a little bit, but this is the scene I was talking about when I was referring to Julian acting weird again in this episode. Last week, he was sweating a lot. He was just kind of being a little bit suspicious. Well, he's talking to Sean, and he's clearly like, Sean, do not take that gig. You know what happened to Dorothy when you left the family last time. But this is the moment when I'm marking as weird. We see him eating his own food, his spaghetti, and I'm thinking to myself, why is he eating to a dinner date or to a dinner gathering? And I went back, as soon as I saw him eating that spaghetti, I said to myself, wait a minute. You all remember when Dorothy said to Sean that Lesser Saints members are very odd, they wear different clothing, and they eat different food. And in particular, they don't eat the food that Sean makes. And I'm like, why isn't Mr. Julian eating Sean's very particular food? And you all know, I've been saying this for many seasons now, 2 seasons to be exact. I believe that there is someone in the Turner family, whether it's Sean, Dorothy, or Julian, they have either been Lesser Saints members or they're going to be converted into Lesser Saints members by the end of the show. Let me know if I'm just taking a little bit of a deep dive into my conspiracies. I always want to give you guys a wild theory every review, but was it weird that he was eating food at a dinner date because he didn't want to eat the food that Sean was preparing because he's converted himself into a member? It might be a bit of a stretch, but I don't know, Julian. You've been acting very weird this season. Let me know what you all think about that moment. But it's at this point that Nancy has definitely arrived, and she's not really greeted nicely by Leanne, who is not nice to her at all during this date. And again, she's walking her into the house, and again, this dinner date was very, very awkward. Cut to Dorothy learning of the truth from the night. She pulls Leanne aside. She feels terrible for forcing Leanne to go outside. And Leanne tells her in this moment, she's okay. She's not afraid anymore. And she is just not ready. And I'm like, you're not ready for what, Leanne? What are you prepping yourself for? We all know she's prepping herself for this war to come. But is that what she was referring to? Or was she referring to something else? Only time will tell. But let's get back into holier than thou Sean, who has prepared fish and wine, which is very biblical if you all are familiar with some of the stories in the Bible with Jesus creating the fish and, multiplying it for the people to eat. So very, very religious in that sense of tonight's dish. But we find out that Nancy is indeed a vegan, so she can't eat the food, but leave it to Dorothy to be the host and being very asking her questions with her atheist brothers. I'm like, oh yes, this dinner is going to be something very fun to look on, and it did not disappoint. Notice something too, how Nancy and Leanne were very changing these awkward eyes at each other. We know why Leanne was looking at Nancy, but why was Nancy so infatuated, so keyed in on Leanne is very interesting. But going back to it, this is where a lot of my frustration kind of came in this episode. It's communication, Turner family. Why in the hell is Dorothy? I know she says we can have our little secrets, and maybe she did take that literally and doesn't want to tell Sean what she found on the footage, which, by the way, I don't know why Sean isn't just daily watching the footage himself, but putting that aside, we all know he's a new man, right, with his new religious, or him going back to his religious foundations. But why didn't Dorothy tell Sean, hey, Sean, can I just talk to you for a second? Hey, Leanne might be a little bit off tonight because I just found out she was attacked. So yeah, just keep that in mind, have some sympathy towards her. But I don't know why Leanne, or I should say Dorothy, didn't tell Sean. what she found. And she didn't. I hope she tells him by next episode, but I think this show is going to give us, she's not going to tell him because, again, girl code, they have their secrets they're going to keep from Sean. I'm so frustrated by the secrets. If the characters would just relay information to each other, a lot of stuff will be figured out by now. The mystery box of certain things would be revealed, but hey, that's the show. It's a slow burn. Every show has moments where characters don't communicate, and this is one of them, but I'm not a fan of a lack of communication in shows, especially a show like this, but neither here nor there. This moment here, we see Leanne is definitely acting like a child, and I'm not going to lie, I had a bit of a laugh myself when they were like, okay, you want to say grace, Nancy? And she's like, oh, no, it's fine. And Leanne's like, say grace. And like, as far as like, she said the word grace, so we can go ahead and eat. She was very, very childish in this episode. Again, she's embracing more of her darker side, and I'm not gonna lie, that side has a little bit of comedy to it, Leanne, but it's the details for me, ladies and gentlemen. As we see, Dorothy notices that Nancy's arms were covered in goosebumps, and we also notice that Leanne's leg is shaking like, she has the Holy Spirit. My thing was, why was Nancy so cold in the house, and why does she have goosebumps? Is she nervous? Does she know something? Can she sense that Leanne might know something about her, which we're going to talk about that here in a bit, but I'm like, what's going on right now? What's all this tension in the room? We're going to get to it, ladies and gentlemen, as Nancy brings up how people at church can quote Sean and his appearance on last season, and this is another example of Dorothy starting to remember, wait a minute, Sean, you went to the show last year? I don't recall that, as she's starting to remember what all went down last year. So again, I talked about the gardening moment, now this moment, and we're going to get to a moment at the end here that she's starting to put the pieces together. And also, I don't know if you all noticed, but this is where we get another maybe foreshadowing when Sean knocks over the wine and it goes into Leanne's plate, which solidifies or maybe symbolizes blood. But speaking of blood, we go to what happened that night. Let's break it all down. And my prediction comes true, as we do see that it was the homeless people that did save Leanne, like I mentioned last week, and they killed the Lesser Saints, and not in just like, quick, done and easy. They slit their throats, and I'm very curious on what they did with the bodies. At first, I thought that they maybe put the bodies in Leanne or Dorothy's gardening, but I don't know what they did with the bodies because they just lay them against like some brick wall, so I don't know if the bodies are just laying there. If they are, maybe it wasn't reported on the news because they were just lesser saints. They were people that probably don't have identities. But I'm like, are there 2 dead bodies in that park that no one reported on the news, especially behind the house of a news reporter? Putting that aside, but they kill the Lesser Saints member. As we see, Leanne is, on the ground, and we see the one guy that we followed a couple weeks. He's on the ground saying that, as I predicted as well, we used to be members, but we have changed. And this is kind of like, you are our leader. We want to follow you. You were the first one to kind of break out of the cycle, break out of the servant, and be your own person. And we kind of follow suit. So it makes me wonder, again, going back to Sean's history, we know that Sean was homeless at one point. Was at any point in his life, was he involved at the cult? I hope that is something we can explore sooner rather than later, but we do get the reveal that the homeless people are indeed Lesser Saints member at one point in their life, but they broke the cycle, very similar to Leanne, and they want to maybe start their own cult with Leanne being their leader. And it's also important to note that the Lesser Saints member said to them before they died, she must be reunited. And again, they killed them in cold blood. Let me know what you all thought of that moment. Was it satisfying? Do you want to learn more about these homeless kids and their new leader, Leanne? Let's talk about that in the comments. But wrapping up this dinner date here, I talked about the hair that was found in Leanne's food. Sean's slipping here as we find some more food or hair in the food. But we go to Leanne, continue to be rude to Nancy after saying she's no longer a belief in her religion. And she sarcastically says, oh, thank you for your permission. But that's not the last rude thing Leanne hands for Nancy. As we go back to it, as Nancy mentions, her path to religion wasn't a straight line. And this is when Leanne looks her in the eye and say, you're a rotten person. And she goes into her past here as she says, Nancy tells her, and she's very uncomfortable at this point in the episode, that she's going to head out. But hey, Leanne, my door is always open. You can come talk to me. And Leanne puts a little smirk on her face. Oh, I can talk to you about my secrets and yours. And this is what I mentioned, the character study. I'm loving the performance by the actress that plays Leanne. She's really doing her thing. But let's get into the moment here. Leanne breaks Nancy down like a fraction, like a math problem. She calls her out on what she's done in the past. And she mentions as refer to, this person that you took advantage of, she was like a vegetable. She was, small in your eyes. I bet that made you feel good. And we see Nancy starts to cry, runs out of the house. She tells, Sean to go F himself. I assume that's the last time that Sean's going to go to that church. But it's in this moment I'm thinking to myself, when you push someone from their religion, they go find religion somewhere else. And even Nancy says it at the dinner table, you should always have something to believe in. I wonder if Leanne's actions towards Nancy is going to push Sean towards another religion, aka Lesser Saints, or he has a cult leader in his house, and Leanne, will he maybe gravitate towards her new following? I guess it's something we can look forward to. But again, it was in that scene when she called Nancy out, I was like, oh, I'm scared of Leanne myself. I've always been kind of scared of her, but that moment when she called her out on her BS and was able, again, channeling her power, this is yet again showing you her darker side, that she was able to look into her past. Like, how was she able to do that just by looking at her? She has very special skills. But wrapping up the episode here, we actually learn from Julian, from looking on Reddit, that what Nancy did in the past was pretty despicable. She had a assault against her mom, who was suffering from dementia, so it goes back to what she was relaying to at the table. But it goes into Leanne here as she wants to smoke weed now. Again, she's very rebellious, very different, really embracing her darker side. And luckily for her, Julian has a stash in the gardening area. We see Dorothy looking at them, and she says, come back inside. But even before that, let me rewind a little bit. That same guy, the homeless guy, comes up to behind them, and obviously Julian's like, what the hell, dude, get out of here, lock that damn gate. As I said, we see Dorothy tells him to lock the gate. But it's in this moment, I've been saying it, I said it last week, I can't wait for Leanne to actually have a conversation with the homeless people. Well, she says to him, oh, I'm fine, thanks for checking on me, as like that's her, her secondhand man, her servant, someone below her, checking up on his leader. She's embracing this dark side, and she's embracing her new fellowship, or her new congregation of a sorts here, which is very, very interesting. But wrapping up the episode, we see that Dorothy pushed Jericho down for bed, and she decides to watch Sean in action on his show from last season. And this is yet another example. Oh yeah, what did happen last year? And there was another moment too when she was looking at the fish. So there was like 4 or 5 examples where we're going to get one of these episodes. I hope this season, maybe next episode, Dorothy's going to have a moment where she remembers exactly what happened that night. And I don't know what's that going to do to their family. Is it going to crumble because she's going to hate that her brother and her husband lied to her? Is she going to do something to herself? Is she going to look for religion in herself in the form of Leanne, and Leanne's going to be the leader of Sean and Dorothy and maybe Julian? I don't know. But we wrap up the episode with Sean confronting Leanne about Nancy, and she's a little bit high, and she tells Sean that God didn't bring Jericho back. And we see that she tells him, you should go back to work. Everything's going to be fine. I would have loved it if she would have looked at him and said, God didn't bring Jericho back, I did. And then would have ended the episode on that moment. That would have been great. But again, I do, her with the confidence and just walking by him with Pringles in her hand, that, just go back to work, Sean. I got this covered. Again, I'm loving what they're doing with Leanne. Again, I do have my frustrations on, I don't know how the show can give us a new character last week in Nancy, and by the next week, we learn more about her secrets than we do about the Turners or Leanne or Julian. I want more from those main characters than I do from a supporting character. And speaking of characters, where's Vera? What is Roscoe doing? Give me a little bit more answers, M. Night and the creators of this show, which again, I'm enjoying this narrative. I'm enjoying this character study. I just want more answers, and I hope we get it sooner rather than later. But hey, that's my thoughts of this episode. That's my breakdown. Again, let me know your Easter eggs, your pros, your cons, and what you all hope to see in next week. If you stuck around to this point in the video, I appreciate you. Before you all leave, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and come and join this community if you haven't already. Check out my other content. Again, I hope you all are staying safe. Hope you enjoyed this review. Subscribe to the channel, watch my other reviews, check out my other content, and we'll catch you all on the next video.